Steam curled from grates as brass cutters clicked in a steady rhythm along the Neo-noir alley. Victor walked point with perked ears and wide eyes, his canary-yellow coat mottled with ghosted rosettes. Behind him, Esther moved with measured confidence, jade beads ticking softly against her chest, the faint scar on her muscle catching lamplight. Eva kept the flank, her freckled pelt calm and her nicked ear turned to the alley's hum, a vine twine sling securing her rolled map. They patrolled, because the alley's inventions needed guardians who knew which pipe sang to which door. Victor called them custodians of comfort, which sounded grand until he wondered about condiments. Esther kept her pace while Eva watched the wires for trouble. Garbanzo trotted alongside under his oversized leaf hat with a dry rhythm to his words. A lattice of chimes, pressure bells, and pneumatic lines ran beneath their block, and the trio listened for wrong notes that meant neighbors would suffer. Posters for a grinning badger mascot appeared with odd typos, dotting their route like breadcrumbs. Eva marked each flyer on her map as whispers spread that City Hall had stolen the costume. Garbanzo's precise tone made even rumors sound catalogued. Count Slopula rose from a storm grate, quartz carapace cracked like old glass, a mourning veil pinned to his thorax. Wendell clacked beside him with etched telemarks and a strapped rulebook, while Grack limped forward with a crooked leg and a grin. Slopula announced eminent domain over every doorbell in the alley, invoking civic acoustics like a decree. The leopards felt the insult sting their noses even before the plan took shape. They wanted grief to be policy, not feeling. Slopula declared that constant polka dirges would discipline hearts into reverence, an indefinite mourning with no sunset clause for villain legacies. Wendell supported him with rigid certainty, and Grack liked the beat, because it sent people home in shame. The motives were cold and calculated, and the consequences would touch every stoop. They laid out a technical hymn to control the alley. Micro-resonator ticks would be fitted into bell housings to force a standardized funeral polka, synchronized through the municipal substation on a schedule. Rack promised compliance needles for buildings that resisted, and Slopula vowed the alley would echo like a mausoleum by dawn. The plan had reach, timing, and teeth, and the trio understood the threat. Esther stepped forward to say the alley was a home, not a mausoleum, and Victor added that polka and grief made poor roommates. Slopula bowed mockingly and swept past toward a junction box, while Wendell recited an ordinance page number. Crack flicked a shard at Garbanzo, who answered with a dry correction on assault. The ticks left authority smeared in the air as they moved on. Across at Spindle Row, Jade, Silkworm's Marjorie, Juice, and Harpo set their carts under a rattling sign and escalated a feud about potato salad. Their silk lines laced many bell housings, and frank cooperation meant sagging wires and missed maintenance. A fresh mascot flyer on Marjorie's cart had the badger's eyes slightly crossed, a detail Eva marked and Garbanzo flagged as an oddity. The stakes for their quarrel were practical, not petty. From a test block, the polka leaked like a cold draft. Microticks warmed open panels and snapped into brass, and a grandmother pressing her stoop bell triggered the first urge. Esther tried to throw a countertone with the tuning fork, but the new resonators drowned it. Slopula lifted his veil to savor the neighbors' flinches. They struck at the substation under moonlight that sharpened every puddle's edge. Eva traced the master chime's run on her map, while Victor squeezed through a vent with Garbanzo riding his leaf hat like cargo. At the panel, Wendell appeared with a citation for unlawful tampering, and Grack dropped a resin-woven net. Slopula warned that righteous hearts did not override municipal grief. Defeat spread through the alley as every entrance sang the dirge. Shopkeepers stopped greeting, because pressing bells meant being drenched in enforced mourning for a villain no one liked. Grack chased them across scaffolding, taunting them with his beat. Another mascot flyer showed the badger missing a tooth, and Eva marked it as the City Hall rumor swelled. On Spindle Row and Rain, the feud boiled over. Marjorie shouted that Juice had stolen her dill. Juice cursed that Harpo salted the samples, and Harpo only hummed louder with a stubborn tilt of the ladle. In a nearby window, a human Italian pizza chef in a white apron casually spun dough like a moon, unnoticed by the alley. Watching the near fight, The lepers felt a hard splinter of hopelessness take hold. Under a shadowed niche, Victor and Esther snapped at each other as they tried to breathe. Victor argued that if toothpaste could be a condiment, it might grease their courage. Esther called it walking on soap in the rain. Eva pressed a finger to her nicked ear and reminded them that conflict needed aim. Garbanzo adjusted his twine belt and delivered a dried line about sticky situations and unattended potato salad. Eva proposed a blind taste test judged by Mrs. Gruff, Old Finn, and Two-Blade Tom, each sworn to fairness. Under a patched umbrella, the three elders sampled in turn until laughter broke when the results split. Mrs. Gruff chose Marjorie for texture, Old Finn chose Juice for balance, and Tom chose Harpo for daring. The alley embraced a three-way tie that cooled the feud. Quick interlude to support the channel so more alley tales can be told. Tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment with the word slop so the bells know you are here. It helps keep the network humming and the villains on their toes. Thank you for being part of this alley. With tempers cooled, Eva asked the silkworms to weave together, demonstrating how silk could carry sense across Bence's messages. Marjorie promised nets thin as a whisper. Juice offered braided carriers for anything needed. Harpo finally spoke about a worm-burst release. They agreed because the fair contest proved the leopards defended community before victory. In a shuttered depot of sleeping parade floats, Garbanzo discovered the town mascot costume crammed with sacks of unpopped corn and a faded Founders' Day sign. He dragged the top hat back and reported that the conspiracy was more storage than sinister, with a literal kernel of truth. Esther connected the find to how Grack gagged near a popcorn cart and how Slopula's veil trembled. A clue had become a pressure point. By the drain in white breath, they reasoned it through. The antagonists panicked at popcorn scent. The silkworms could weave pockets that warmed on lamp pipes to release buttery clouds, and the stash would fuel it. Eva laid out the plan to flood the Civic Acoustics Tower and retune the master chime, while the tick scattered. Victor traced the entries on the map, and Esther agreed that apologies could wait but alignment could not. They gathered a small team because the street begged. Tinkers brought wire coils and bell keys. Silkworms wove jade netting with popcorn oil ampoules. Garbanzo strapped the mascot top hat like a backpack. Esther assigned roles Victor and Eva to the master bell, her and Garbanzo on scent and decoys, silkworms on airflow. Victor muttered about toothpaste in crises, and Esther told him to write a thesis later. Night turned puddles into lenses as they crept to the Civic Acoustics Tower hunched behind the alley. Slopula preened on a catwalk. Wendell clattered down with pamphlet ready, and Grack bounced on his crooked leg. Esther signaled, and silken nets dropped to slow their reach. Slopula declared that grief had good taste, and Esther told him to keep his flavor far from their doors. Garbanzo struck flint to the heating pipe under silk pockets, and the first warm breath of popcorn scent rolled across the catwalk. Slopula's antennae quivered. Wendell's calculations died in his eyes, and Grack's grin cracked into panic. Victor slid past a brace with Eva at his shoulder and spotted the master bell behind the grill. The opening they needed had arrived without a shout. Marjorie, Juice, and Harpo climbed vents like jade commas, fanning scent deeper into the tower. Grack hiccuped on the butter and clawed at his chest, his legs losing rhythm. Wendell snapped his rulebook shut when the smell undid his order. Eva threaded a tuning key into the grill while Victor called out remembered frequencies, and the master pegs began to turn. Slopula tried to flee down a wire ladder, veil flapping, and ran into Garbanzo swaggering in the mascot costume. Garbanzo announced it as an unsponsored performance and tripped a line that dumped kernels on a hot pipe. The popping drummed, multiplying the smell until Slopula scattered. Esther kicked the override free. The polka cut off mid-wail, and Eva struck 3 clean notes to restore neighborhood time. They moved from stopping harm to undoing it. Marjorie and Juice plucked micro-resonators from bell housings like burrs while Harpo sealed holes with silk so fine even mice would approve. Tinkers lobbed every removal, and Garbanzo gathered ordnance copies for evidence. In the square, the mascot costume and corn stash were explained. Laughter cooled the rumor, and curls became a symbol of the alley's stand. Neighbors stepped onto stoops to ring their bells and hear their own songs again. Children pressed buttons for jubilant trills instead of dirges, and a grandmother cried from relief rather than enforcement. Folks joked that the badger mascot loved movies, given all the popcorn. Garbanzo corrected them, saying the badger loved storage solutions. Victor scuffed a paw and admitted toothpaste had structural issues as a condiment. Esther, whiskers singed and faintly caramel-scented from a pipe, allowed it as a topping in emergencies if he needed peace. Eva tapped a bell and said snacks could wait while they tossed neighbors to keep the network honest. Garbanzo announced that balance had been restored in both seasoning and sound. Civic Acoustics faced a public correction. Slopula was arrested and pinned in a glass box at Municipal Hall to hear requests he could no longer twist. His veil seized as evidence. Wendell lost his rule-laden post and his telemarks became records of violations, as he was ordered to clean up duty without a rulebook. Greg's grin faded under pothole patching shifts where popcorn cart smells kept him meek. The age of tinkers breathed again as neighbors rethreaded wires without fear. The Jade silkworms formed a cooperative called Three Tastes and pledged silk for bell maintenance on weekends. At dawn, the leopards repaired the last panel as the alley steamed and the mascot's hat dried on a railing. Garbanzo said calmly that heroes were like doorbells, pressed into service, but they should ring choices, not orders. The alley stayed lit and humming, and footsteps made music chosen by those who walked there. Victor, Esther, and Eva kept their watch with fewer knots between them, their disagreement now an easy thread instead of a snarl. They had stopped the cruel because the alley was theirs to guard. The bells sang as neighbors wanted, and the faint memory of popcorn still made the ticks shudder in their cells. All the slop in this video was generated using AI. For more stories from the alley, please like, subscribe, and comment the word slop so we know you're part of the watch. Thanks for supporting creator-made narration of community-made choices.